Hi, my name is Jeff Hitchcock. I'm the founder and president of Children with Diabetes.
And my name is Marissa Town. I am clinical director for Children with Diabetes.
And for those of you who don't know, Marissa is my daughter, and she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was 24 months old in September of 1989. In the summer of 1995, I created Children with Diabetes as a website to share our family's experience raising a child with type 1 diabetes. So, Marissa, you were diagnosed at 2. Do you remember anything about that?
So, not really. I mean, I have a vague memory of being in the hospital, but I don't know if it's actually real. You know what I mean? And then I do remember meeting with a psychologist. And in that, I remember sitting down and coloring. And I remember thinking, why is this lady asking me all these questions? Like, I just want to color,
Yeah.
I was 2.
Yeah. So our experience, that of my wife, Brenda, and I, was common, we came to learn. So Marissa had been sick for a while. It was the summer in Washington, D.C. She was drinking a lot of water, but it was just hot. So we kind of thought, well, it's hot, she's thirsty. Well, that wasn't the case. We had taken her to the pediatrician on a Friday afternoon, and she couldn't get a urine sample because 2-year-olds do not pee on command. And rather than doing a finger stick glucose, she sent us home and said, get some urine and come back. Well, I had to travel to California that next day. So I got on a plane, flew to California, and this is before cell phones. So when I landed and finally got to the office, I called, and it turns out she had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So I got on the next plane home and went to Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C., where my wife and I had a chance to meet with the diabetes care team. And we had a great diagnosis experience. And I know those words strung together are not common, but we had it. A gentleman named Dr. Alan Glasgow was the pediatric endocrinologist with whom we met. And he said, don't worry, everything is going to be okay. And in September of '89, that was still a bit of a bet, but in fact, it proved to be true. And prior to Marissa being diagnosed, we didn't know anything about diabetes, but of course, we had the crash course in everything there is to do with finger sticks and injections and all of that. So Marissa, thinking back, what challenges would you say you had growing up with type 1?
Well, I know when I was on 2 injections a day where I had to eat breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack, my whole thing, and the reason that I ended up getting an insulin pump was that I wanted to sleep in the mornings, which still tracks to this day. I'm not a morning person. So I think, for me, I really tried to, live with you guys as the example of, we're going to make this work. You can do what you want. But, back in those days, it was a little bit more regimented. I remember going to diabetes camp every summer, and we would all do our shots together. And I thought that was really cool. And then when I became a teenager and the Friends for Life conferences started, I remember learning so much from the diabetes educators there who had grown up with type 1.
Yeah, very much so. So the challenges I think that we had, to kind of echo what you were saying, is the insulins in 1989 are not at all like what they are today. It was human regular and NPH as the basal. And for those of you who know, NPH stands for neutral protamine hagedorn, but we really call it not particularly helpful because its intradose variability is so high. So that led to that regimentation, the meals at the same times, and challenges with dosing. We were the first person in our area here in the Cincinnati area to get Humalog when it was finally approved. And I remember that changing the dynamic on how we ate as a family. It meant we could be more spontaneous and treat highs more reliably. So the innovation in insulin and then in sensors and pumps and all of that really changed how Marissa was able to grow up and basically take over your diabetes care. So And that kind of sort of gets to an interesting question about, from your perspective, what changes have you seen in the diabetes world that have impacted you the most?
Yeah, I do think the faster acting insulin was a huge, huge help for me. And getting on the pump where, I didn't have to take shots all the time, just doing an infusion set every couple days. I mean, that was life changing. And it was something that we had to fight for, which was really frustrating at the time. But I learned young how to advocate for myself by watching my parents advocate for me. And then when CGMs came around that were, relatively reliable, that was when I was in college. And that's when things got a bit easier for me. I think, doing finger sticks is great. You still get some data, but having the ability to see the low coming and take action earlier and really tighten your range, because that was one of the things that, can be really exhausting, is those big ups and downs where you're on a roller coaster all day that you can't seem to get off of. And all of those tools have really made a big difference for me.
Yeah, I would echo that. As I think about innovation in the 33 years, my goodness, since you were diagnosed, 34 this year, the advances in insulins have been really important. The rapid acting analogs and the long acting analogs, it's really the predictability. Type 1 is filled with unpredictable aspects of care. And the more you can reduce that, the better your outcomes are. Sensors are really, in my opinion, the most important technology that people with type 1 diabetes benefit from. We can get insulin into people lots of ways, and pumps really do make life so much easier. But the data that you get from today's CGMs let us make better decisions, or let our smart automated insulin delivery systems make better decisions. And that leads to better outcomes. And that innovation on the pump side, whether tubeless or tubed, coupling those with algorithms to do automated insulin delivery, reduces the psychological burden of living with type 1. It takes away hundreds of decisions a day and lets everybody sleep better at night. So those are the kind of things that I see as being really interesting. And then in the last 2 years, we've seen two other really big innovations. One is new glucagons.
Yes.
So finally, we have ready to use, reliable glucagons that aren't a Rube Goldberg kit that you have to put together in panic mode. And then just last fall, with the commercialization of teplizumab, we now can intervene and hopefully delay the onset for years, if not longer, of type 1 diabetes in family members who are at risk. And that is a profound change.
Yeah. And, it's funny because that's something that, when I was a teenager, I would have said, well, that doesn't help me. Well, we've got a Baxter cameo.
Baxter in the back.
Sorry. When I was younger, I wouldn't have cared as much. But, now as a mom, I have I have two kids. I have one biological son who was negative for antibodies when he was younger, but that can change over time. And so, I'm really invested in everything that helps prevent people from having to deal with, the burden of type 1 diabetes.
So Marissa, what advice would you give someone just being diagnosed? And you can actually look back on our neighbors who we helped diagnose, or who were diagnosed December of last year.
So I think one thing that I always say to the person with diabetes is own diabetes so that it doesn't own you. And, that doesn't mean that you're going to get it right every time, but, you are in the driver's seat. And if you try to ignore it, it is going to sneak up and make things really difficult. So that's my advice for the people that are diagnosed. The other thing, and especially for the parents who now have access to all of this data, which can be really overwhelming, is it's really an art, not a science. And, I think we say that sometimes about medicine in general, but really with diabetes, there are so many variables, and remembering at the end of the day that no one gets it right all the time. No one is perfect. So those goals, those targets that we have are goals, but that doesn't mean that you have to get it perfect every time.
Yeah, and my counsel to newly diagnosed parents is exactly what Alan Glasgow said to me in 1989. Don't worry, everything is going to be okay. And I do stress, as Marissa said, that perfection is unattainable. Blood glucose targets are just that. It's something you aim for. It's more important to use the data you get from sensors and responses and how you feel and all of that to make better decisions every day. You're going to be making these decisions for a very long time. So take those as positive, not as negative. And I guess this all distills down to something I say a lot. The only bad blood sugar is the one you don't know.
Yeah, and just as a glaring example of perfection not being attainable, here is Marissa, person living with diabetes for 33 years, registered nurse and clinical diabetes care and education specialist, telling you that sometimes your blood sugar will be high.
Yeah, indeed. So I'm looking at some of the topics we wanted to talk about. And one of them was, what do I wish I'd known as a parent early on? I think it would have been nice to meet with some families who'd had this experience, who could counsel us. My wife and I didn't really feel, a lot of angst or anything, but we were basically doing this by ourselves. There were not the kind of support groups and organizations like Children with Diabetes back in 1989. So the counsel I would give also is go find your tribe, spend time with them, whether it is at the conferences that Children with Diabetes puts on, whether it's local support groups or meetups or anything. Just find others to share experiences with. So.
Yeah, and I would really strongly agree with that. I think, I mentioned earlier, I grew up going to different diabetes camps. I know ADA puts on some camps as well. And there are so many opportunities to connect with other people. And this is what really cultivates resilience, because sometimes you just need to talk to someone who really understands what you're going through. And I think this, is true for all aspects of life, and especially when you're living with something that is sort of an invisible burden to many others. So we have a group chat with a bunch of my friends for life that I've grown up with, attending the Children with Diabetes Friends for Life conferences. And, we text each other when our blood sugars are 100, like, look, we did it, we nailed it. And then we text each other when we have a 400. I had the other day, I took a nap. My sight went bad when I was napping and I woke up at 400, and you're just like, sometimes you just need that validation, and hang in there, keep doing it. We've got your back.
Yeah. So you mentioned camp. You went as a camper, and when you were 4, got an award for summoning the courage to give yourself your first injection. And I have a photograph of that. When I show that at conferences, it always gets me a little emotional. But you also went back as a counselor and as a healthcare professional, as a nurse. What do you tell families if they ask, tell me about camp?
Yeah, I mean, for me, camp and, conferences like Friends for Life, it's an opportunity for people to feel normal. It's an opportunity for kids to find their support network. And it's something that I think is invaluable. And you'll see it even in the research. It shows time and time again that adequate support is something that people with chronic conditions, including diabetes, really need to keep on keeping on to make it through things. There's going to be times where you're burnt out and you don't want to do it anymore. Like, that's going to happen. I mean, I've been doing this for 33 years, and, especially after pregnancy, there's a time where a lot of women, struggle, like, I just worked really, really hard for 9 months and now I need a break. So finding people that can help you through those times is really important. And, as I mentioned earlier, one of the other things that's really important is learning from people who really get it. So I had some very influential people in my life that were mentors for diabetes. They were, diabetes educators or camp counselors or just people who had lived with type 1 longer than me, who told me the real answers to the questions that I had, instead of things like, oh, well, don't drink alcohol because whatever reason it is, right? Of course, you're underage. And I'm not saying that I'm condoning underage drinking. I'm just saying kids do it. So instead of doing that, they armed me with the tools so that I could be safe, so that I could make it through adolescence in a semi-normal way, but really in a safe way.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the first people that I called when I first got pregnant, for example. I just wrote an article about this last week as parenting with type 1. I was terrified of pregnancy because it's something that, if I screw it up, then something bad could happen to my kid, to my baby. And, you see the doctors are telling you, well, you have to be in this very tight range. And you're like, cool, but I have type 1 diabetes. Like, do you know that? And having someone that I can call to say, oh my gosh, I'm freaking out. Am I doing harm here? Is everything going to be okay? And having them say, yes, remember I did this like 30 years ago before we even had a Dexcom sensor, before we had rapid acting insulin. And I think that is similar to what, my dad said, having someone to help you to know that they've been through it can make a huge difference.
Yeah. And that's a key part of what we do at Children with Diabetes and at our Friends for Life conferences. It's a way to go find others and get assurances or get advice about our lives. And that basically was what the original motivation to begin the organization in 1995 was. Very simply, share our experiences raising a child with type 1 diabetes in a positive way. And as I think Marissa had alluded to, our shared goal, my wife and I, was that we would fit diabetes into our life, not the other way around. And I think we've done a pretty good job on that. So one of the things we were kind of asked to kind of chat about is our collective involvement in the organization. And I founded it. I serve as president. And Marissa has been in a bunch of different roles.
Yeah. So I grew up attending Friends for Life. I learned everything I needed to know and more. And I think, in my teen years, early on, I saw how helpful it was for families to see me simply existing and living with diabetes without complications as a way of alleviating their stress, and we have a lot of families that come that are newly diagnosed and the parents are just so worried about their kids. And, I didn't fully understand it at the time because I was a teenager. And now that I have children, wow, do I understand? And am I glad that I'm the one with type 1 and not my kids? But, there is something really special, and I'm really grateful that I am able to just help people make their lives a little bit easier, just a little bit less stressful. And I decided early on I needed to become a diabetes educator. I wanted to become a nurse and become a diabetes educator so that I can help pass on all the tricks that I've learned from all the diabetes educators that helped me to other families. And, this is something that sometimes people really, get burned by their healthcare team and their healthcare providers, and they struggle. And they really won't listen to someone, but sometimes they'll listen to me just because I'm coming from a place of, listen, I've lived this. I know it sucks. I know it's hard. How can I help you? Like, what do you need to make, yourself feel a little bit better and be a little bit healthier? And I feel really lucky that I happen to be born into this family and realize how much lemonade I can make out of the lemons that we were given.
So you attended as a kid with type 1. You helped staff the teen program for a while.
Yes.
And now you serve as our clinical director, and on the website you write content that is scientific, clinical in nature. And at the conferences, I've handed off to you, thank you, the responsibility of choosing the faculty and the programming at the Friends for Life conferences. And you've done a phenomenal job bringing in new voices, new faces, new topics. And one of the areas that's really interesting for us, at least mostly in our Orlando conference, is that more people with type 1 are adults now than kids. So we've seen a shift in demographics to a majority adults with type 1 versus what it was at the beginning, which was like families like mine where the kids had type 1. So new programming.
Yeah, and it's been really fun. This is something that I really enjoy, is helping make sure that we're meeting the needs of the diabetes community, helping make sure that, everyone feels welcome to come to Friends for Life, and everyone sees that they are being represented in their community. And so it's something that we are strongly passionate about, and I've really enjoyed working on it and working for, I started out volunteering in the elementary program, and then went up to teens, and it's so much fun. And it's nice to now develop, our younger volunteers, who most of them live with type 1 or love someone with type 1 or have a sibling with type 1. And just to see them, doing the same thing that I wanted to do, just helping other people live with diabetes.
Yeah. And the volunteers and the staff who support our conferences are the best in the world. We are a small nonprofit. CWD is now actually 7 people, which is kind of amazing because 3 years ago it was 2. But hundreds of people come and make our conferences happen. They staff the youth program. They oversee the technology. They work registration. They manage the exhibition hall. They do basically everything that makes these conferences happen. And we couldn't do it without them. And at the conferences, they're the real heroes.
Yeah. And, as we've talked about, it's really incredible to see this organization and the Friends for Life conferences grow in a way that is meeting the needs of the adults with type 1. So adults with type 1s, we don't have a lot of camps to go to unless you want to volunteer as a camp counselor, which, by the way, wow, kudos to all of you. You don't sleep the whole week, and it is exhausting. It is so much fun, but man, is it tiring. I like being a camp nurse better. But this is something that, people with type 1, adult or kids, we all need to have that support system. And that's what Friends for Life helps. It helps fill that void of creating a community for people with diabetes. And for people who want to get involved, come to the conference, see what it's about, and then apply to volunteer if you want to.
Yep. And everything's available on the website, childrenwithdiabetes.com. Very simple. I don't think I have anything else. Marissa, you?
I don't know, just good luck in your diabetes journey, wherever you are. And I hope that this has helped you in some way.
Yep. All right. With that, we'll see you next week, or someone will. Bye.